With the most recent event, Dice Rally, finally coming to a close, I figured now would be the best time to look back at all of the previous events and rank them on a tier list from best to worst. Hello guys, and welcome back to another cold episode. On today's episode, we're going to take a look at every single one of the events in the most recent, in Master Duel, and rank them from best to worst. So, yeah, let's just begin. Obviously, this is based on the fact that, like, the newest event, Dice Rally, just ended, and I really enjoyed it. But I'm going to rank all of them in regards to the other events and just, like, go through them based on how fun they are. Mostly how fun they are. But also kind of just how good of an event they are. Let's start off with the anti-spell event. This was not necessarily the first event. I believe the first event was the XZ event. These are not necessarily in chronological order. They're in alphabetical order. So keep that in mind. Starting off here with the anti-spell, I'm going to put this in C tier. It's okay. It was fairly decent, but it didn't really stand out in any meaningful capacity. And for the most part, it was really just a whole bunch of really frustrating decks to play against. It was a lot of, like, floodgates, as well as just, like, monster combo decks, like Adamantipator. So it was either you're getting floodgated or you're getting monster comboed, and it was just, like, an okay idea. It wasn't great, though. And yet pendulums existed, which was kind of weird. That, to me, bothered me immensely, because pendulums are supposed to be spells as well, and yet they weren't banned. I get not banning them, but it didn't really make sense to not ban them. The Attribute 4 event, I'm also going to put into C tier. I'm going to put it slightly higher. The reason for this is because it could have been significantly better, but it was basically just like, hey, you can't play Tier Element. That was more or less all that it was. I guess you also couldn't play Sprite at the time, I believe. But this one was so unbelievably mid because it could have been so much better. Like, nothing really changed outside of just banning the top, like, 2 to 3 decks, I believe. But pretty much, like, everything else was playable. All of, you know, you could play all of Adamantipator. Like, none of the hand traps were limited in any meaningful capacity. Like, I believe Max C was allowed. And there was a bunch of stuff like that where it's just like, it didn't really make sense. If they had restricted you in only playing Earth or Fire, but you couldn't play, like, Earth and Fire monsters or something like that, like, that would be more interesting, which they did eventually do with the, with some of the other events. But, like, yeah, this one in particular was, not very fun. That's for sure. Next up, we have Dice Rally. Dice Rally is the most recent event. You can hear the music currently going on. It is a very, very solid event. And this is the main reason I wanted to talk about this, or do this tier list, was because I wanted to talk about specifically Dice Rally and what I really enjoyed, and why I think it is so much better than most of the other stuff. First of all, it's an actually interesting gimmick, right? There is a reason to sit down and play Dice Rally as opposed to just playing ranked. Like, for example, with Attribute, or I don't know, like Dual Triangles. Dual Triangles are so mid. We'll get to those later. But, like, there is a meaningful difference between, like, a ranked deck and a Dice Rally deck, right? That being said, it's mostly due to the gimmicks of the stuff that actually happens in the game, right? You get these random cards, or you get an extra card, or you get half-life points. It's a really, really fun concept, and it makes every duel different and more interesting. There are a lot of times where, like, the half-life points feels like it's not really going to be that impactful, and then it absolutely is. The fact that you can have multiple people get the half-life point duel, and then it comes down to 2,000 life points instead of 4,000, that's very cool. There's a bunch of other stuff like that as well that are very interesting. Like, for example, Sky Scourge Norless, just, if you get that on your first turn, you just nuke the field and go, alright, it's top deck time, baby. And it's very funny. And there's a bunch of stuff like that that make it a very enjoyable experience. It could also be rather frustrating, but as is the case with pretty much every event on this list, even the good ones can be frustrating. So that's just, you know, the point of a competitive game. There is going to be a moment where you're playing against the opponent and you're like, that's frustrating what you're doing. But overall, I do think that Dice Rally provides more fun and more enjoyment, especially when it comes to, like, deck building and stuff like that. But even with that being said, I think there's a lot that could be improved with it, but it's way more fun and it's way more interesting than a lot of the other events that we've gotten. Duelist Cup is one of my least favorite events of all time. I think it is very poorly designed, both from a competitive standpoint as well as pretty much every other standpoint as well. There's not really a reason for it to be the way that it is. It's maybe one of the most poorly constructed competitive formats maybe ever, because it basically incentivizes you to hurt yourself. So, yeah. This should get its own tier, where it's like F tier, or like Duelist Cup tier, because it is criminal what they do with that. So, there's that. We have 3 separate dual triangles, one of which is, I believe, Synchro Link and XZ, one of which is Synchro Fusion and XZ, and then one of them is the different attributes. Earth, light, something, 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 something. These I'm all going to put into C tier. I'm going to put them all into C tier, and the reason for this, especially with the most recent one, this one is probably the worst. I'm actually going to put this one in D tier. We'll get to this one in a second. But the dual triangles are pretty much just like pick a meta deck and then translate it into that format. And it's basically you just playing against like another meta deck, but like one that doesn't have your own attributes. And that's kind of it. It's just like a slightly weaker version of regular ranked. There's not really an incentive to play that. Like, there kind of is, because obviously you get rewards for all of these, but it's not really something that you want to like come back to. I don't really enjoy any of these. I've never really been like, oh yeah, I really want to play, you know, my XZ deck against my opponent's Synchro deck, or like my Link deck against my opponent's XZ deck, or something like that. Like, that's never really been something that has been enjoyable. It's like, cool, I'm just playing ranked. Like, there's no real difference. And I think having ranked be the only consistent game mode that is always there means that the events generally should be something different. Should be something unique and wholly fun in some capacity. And for the most part, they aren't. X-Zero. X-Zero's, this one I'm going to put into C tier. This one's okay. I don't hate this one. I just felt like it was kind of lackluster. There wasn't a whole lot that you could do. I think this was like when like Labyrinth came out or something like that. And I think Plunder was also one of the big top decks as well. But for the most part, I don't think this deck or this event was all that impressive. Those two decks were like meta at the time as well. So again, it was not really that different from regular ranked. And it was either like stun with True Draco and you just like stunned your opponent, or it was like Labyrinth. There were a few other decks that were playable, but for the most part it was like really boring. The extra deck is what makes Yu-Gi-Oh! Interesting, and so when that is taken away, it becomes very frustrating, at least in my eyes. You could see differently, that's totally fine. I think it was like kind of a mid event though. This was also one of the first events as well, so give or take. Fusion C. It's so basic and bland. Honestly, all of the like just one thing, except for Link. Link is special. All of the like one extra deck mechanic were, there was nothing special. I don't even want to talk about them. Link I will talk about, because Link and the XZ Cup I think are some of the worst events that we have had. They are so bad. They were so bad because it was, hey, what if we did ranked, but there was a extra deck gimmick, and not like a cool extra deck gimmick where it's like, oh, you can only play like these specific monsters, or like, oh, like, you know, you have to use like a specific attribute or a specific type or something like that. No, it's just like, hey, you can only play Link monsters. Oh, that's interesting. Oh wait, no, it's not. We're like, oh, you can only play XZ monsters. It's like, oh, okay. There were so few reasons to play these events, and like it because it was also a ranked system as well. Like, the XZ Cup was basically the Duelist Cup, which was even more frustrating, and the Link regulation was basically just like ranked, and so it was so frustrating to be like, oh, we're getting a new event, hooray! And then it was just the same thing that we've done a million times. And there wasn't even an incentive to play it outside of just like doing ranked. So it was just like, it was so frustrating. It was so annoying. And like, yeah, events I feel like should mostly be fun, and these just weren't. Okay, we have Fusion Link, Fusion Synchro, and Fusion XZ, which all are going to go into C tier. Yeah, none of these were that great. They were okay. they were fairly decent. But like, just having an extra deck gimmick of what extra deck monsters you can use oftentimes isn't enough. And when you give them more, that doesn't necessarily make it better. These, I think, are honestly, I should probably move these down, honestly. I think these are some of the more unfun, uninteresting events. Oh. Duelist Cup gets its own too. I have decided. I've decided it goes in jail. Yeah, these events are they're something. Because you have access to multiple... I'm also going to put these in here. The Synchro Link and the Synchro XZ as well. Surprisingly, I don't think we've gotten an XZ... Oh, we have. Yeah, there it is. I was pretty sure we had. Yeah, all of these are... They're okay. They're not great. But they're okay. In fact, I would say they're actively bad. The singleton ones are at least a little bit more interesting because of the heavy restriction. You're more likely to see some decks you're not really used to seeing, right? For example, with Synchro, maybe something like Flower Guardian or something along those lines. With Fusion, something like Dark Lord. With XZ... Okay, XZ's a bit different. XZ... basically, you play an XZ deck or you don't play an XZ deck, right? But for the most part, like, they're still fairly meta. Link, on the other hand, is like... That doesn't count. But all of these events, they're not terrible, but they're not great. And having that additional extra deck means that there's not really a gimmick. You're just kind of seeing in the same decks, right? There's no, like, nuance. You rarely see anything interesting. There's not all that many interesting changes to, like, a ban list or anything like that. Of course, they like ban the XC, which is nice. It's nice that they started doing that. But for the most part, you're not really getting much more of an experience out of this than you would with, like, anything else, like ranked. So there's not really a big incentive to play it, right? I'm also going to move Synchro down. I forgot that Synchro was absolutely terrible when it showed up because everyone just played like Synchron. And it was either, did you draw the nib or did you not? Because Synchro decks are a joke. Anyway, moving on. Legend Anthology. These are fine. The problem with the Legend Anthology stuff was that it wasn't GOAT format. It was like, hey, what if we made you play anime decks? Except for all of the anime decks are extremely unfun to play against. So you have to play an anime deck against an anime deck. And that was basically the ban list. It was just like, hey, we're just going to nuke everything else. You're going to play a deck from the anime, and that's it. Which entails things like, you know, Dark Magician, which if you've never played against Dark Magician, it's very annoying. Or Synchron, which if you've never played against Synchron, it's very annoying. Or Hero. We all know how annoying Hero is. It's basically a floodgate deck that disguises itself as a combo deck. Or the myriad of other horrible, no good, very bad decks to play against, which all happen to be anime decks. There wasn't a whole lot of interesting decks to really play against. I think the idea of Legend Anthology is fairly good, and the reason for that is because Theme Chronicle just did it better. Theme Chronicle is one of the best events of all time, and it's kind of not close. It's up there in regard, at least in my mind, in the same tier as anything else. Well, actually, one thing in particular, which we'll get to in a second, but like, it is by far one of the best events of all time. And the reason for this is because it did what Legend Anthology should have done, which is taking an actual interesting ban list and just like making it interesting, right? Legend Anthology, that sounds really stupid. Sorry. Legend Anthology is a good idea. The problem is the anime decks that they make are not very interesting with the modern support. Most of the time they're either stun turbo or just some horrible no good combo deck that takes like 10 years to do nothing. So like, that's fun. But most of the time they're not really interesting to play against, right? There have been a few exceptions, but for the most part they haven't been all that fun. So making an event centered around a bunch of not fun decks, not great. Theme Chronicle has like 10 extremely fun decks to play. And because it is a ban list centered around those decks, it makes it even more interesting, right? Orchist, very fun deck to play against. Plunder, very fun deck to play against. It could also be very annoying, though, so I will say that. Rika, very fun deck to play. Not a very fun deck to play against, but very fun deck to play, right? What else was there? There was like Naturia exists, and then there's all of the like, you have like Monarchs and Megalith, and there's a ton of different decks out there in the solo mode that are very interesting. And because Theme Chronicle allows you to use those decks in a wide variety of or with a wide variety of other additional cards, it makes it a very fun experience and is genuinely one of the best ideas for an event that is specific to Master Duel. And it's one of the reasons why I thoroughly enjoy it, and I consistently just play it. It's one of the best events, and it's not really close. Limit 1's not bad. It's pretty simple, but it's basically just like, hey, did you draw the combo? You did? All right, good. Shake my hand. Limit 1 would not be very good right now. And the reason for this is because, like, hey, you could just do the full Fiendsmith combo and nothing would really change. Hey, you could do the full Snake Eye combo and nothing would really change. That being said, at the time, it was, hey, you could do the full Sword Soul combo and nothing really changed. So, yeah, Yu-Gi-Oh's not really suited for Limit 1, so we'll put it slightly above the Legend Anthology. Monster types. These ones were cool ideas. I actually really do like these. I'm gonna put these in B tier. Both of them. The Fiend Fairy. I always want to call it Angel because it's a little angel guy. Fiend and Fairy, as well as the Tri-Beast / Insect, and actually the Insect one was terrible. This one was significantly worse. It could have been much better, but it was significantly worse. The Fiend Fairy one was like fairly okay. It was basically a lot of lab, which is not the most fun to play against, but there were also still like more things that you can do, and because it was so heavily restricted, there was like more interesting ideas in like the limitation. I am a big fan of like really heavily limiting what you're able to do in an event to, one, allow for creativity, but two, I think it just makes for a more interesting dynamic. Granted, I think that there should be more options, but I think there should be a limitation on what you can do individually. So, for example, again, with like the dual triangles, I think those are good ideas. The problem is, like, for the most part, they're not really actually all that limiting. But like the idea of like, oh, hey, you can only use, this is where like attribute would have been really, really good. Is like, hey, what if you could only use earth monsters? It's like, oh, that'd be really interesting. But like, if you play against another person, maybe they're only using earth monsters, but they could also be using only fire monsters. It's like, both of those would be rather interesting. So I think that's where like attribute 4 ended up failing for me. Monster type, I think, however, for the most part, were still very interesting. The problem with the tri-type one and the insect and reptile was the fact that Maxi, that was like the biggest issue. It was like, oh cool, here's this cool event, anyway, here's the roach. It was like, oh, fun. So yeah, it was just plagued by the roach. It was still an interesting idea, but really heavily bogged down. We're gonna talk about that one last. The World Championships are actually fairly fun events to watch, but the World Championship qualifiers are basically just the DC Cup. These are the qualifiers. They're not actually Worlds. Worlds is great. I love Worlds. I really enjoy watching it. I really enjoy participating in it. But the qualifiers are terrible. They're just the Duelist Cup, but slightly, ever so slightly better. Not much, but slightly. Ever so slightly. The Ritual event was actually fairly interesting, but it's similar in nature to like Fusion and XZ. I think it was slightly better because specifically relying on the rituals and like having a bunch of ritual decks, I thought was a bit more interesting. Light versus Dark was better than Dual Triangles, but not by a lot. The Light versus Dark event was fairly okay, but Light was so heavily underrepresented. There were just like not any real decks to play for Light, so it was very frustrating to like try and play Light. And then for Dark, on the other hand, there were a ton And there were so many more dark players as well, because basically if you played light, you were playing Exosister, and that was it. There were no other decks that you could realistically play. And for dark, you had like a few decks, but there wasn't a whole lot that you could do. But at the very least, there was like more decks that you could play. So at the very least, you had options. So yeah, there were like infinitely more dark players. And because of that, you ended up being paired against other dark players, which was hilarious because you lost points for your team if you ended up losing for the overall point score. So if you played against another dark player, it would just be like a net neutral exchange, and it was really silly. Very, very dumb. Actually, I don't know if you actually lost points, but beside the point, right? You get it. Very, very silly. Next up, we have Duel Trials. Duel Trials, very solid. They started out really, really terrible. The first Duel Trials were so unbelievably bad with the, like, loner deck trials with, like, what was it? There was one that was, like, they were all, like, structure decks. And not, like, 3 of structure decks. The 1 of structure decks, where you just have, like, 1 of each card. Very similar to, like, traditional formats. But there was an Xyz, there was a Fusion, and there was a Synchro deck, and the Xyz deck was so far and away above everything else, it was terrible. However, with that being said, the Duel Trials now are very interesting. The most recent one we had, I believe, was the NR Duel Trial, which was very fun, and it was extremely good, and the fact that it was only around for 3 days was criminal, when right before that we had one of the worst dual triangles ever. Man, that dual triangle made me so angry. Yeah. Very tragic. However, on top of that, we've also had, like, the Nibiru dual trial and the Exodia dual trial, which I was hesitant on at first, but it was very, very good. But we've also had things like Respect Play, where it was just play Snake Eye and use Diabellstar to just send the card away, and a bunch of stuff like that. So, that being said, rather interesting. I think it is very, very well done, and they're way more experimental with the dual trials, which makes them way more fun. And because they're only around for 3 days, as opposed to the full however long with the full events, they're a lot better in those short bursts, because you don't have to play them a whole bunch to get all the rewards. It's like, yeah, if you enjoy playing the 2024 or the 2025 Burn Challenge, you can absolutely do that, but you don't have to. Water and Wind is fine. Fine. It's an average event. It was pretty boring, though. There was like nothing playable. There were kind of some decks that were playable, but there really weren't, right? I think, like, Ritual Beast may have been playable, but the only thing I remember was the loner deck was Ice Barrier, and so everyone played Ice Barrier, and you probably know this, but Ice Barrier is not a fun deck to play against. So when everyone's playing Ice Barrier and everyone's just playing like a Floodgate Turbo style deck, you're like, man, I don't want to play this. This sucks. Man, that's so boring. I think there were still like some fairly interesting decks that you could play, right? I think I played like Plunder. No, I'm lying to you. I'm just blatantly lying to you. You can't play Plunder. I'm just lying. I wish you could. I think like Flunder. No, Flunder was not playable. They never allow that. I don't remember what was playable. I don't even remember what I played. So yeah, that just goes to show you there really wasn't much. I think it was like Ritual Beast and Ice Barrier. Oh, I think I played Paleo. Yeah, I think I played Paleo. So there you go. Anyway, and then the king of all events ever. It's NR. NR. I could speak for hours on how fantastic of an event NR is. NR, the normal / rarity festival, was so good, people still, to this day, play that format in their own tournaments and are currently hosting events. Both with the old format, with the, I guess technically the new ban list that Konami just did for the dual trial, and also with their own. So yeah, the community is thriving, and it's because of how insanely good of a format it is. One of the things that makes it so good as well as an event is the simple fact that because every deck is so unbelievably cheap, if you want to play a deck, you absolutely can. It takes no time, it takes no money, it takes no effort. You just copy the deck, paste it, go. And because a lot of decks have the ability, like, don't have the ability to just, like, immediately kill you, you have the ability to kind of, like, play out more turns and really try to get used to a deck. There's a lot more nuance in what you can and cannot do. It's just a phenomenal event, and it worked really, really well. Was it a little not well balanced? Yeah, the first one wasn't exactly the most well balanced. Megalith was absolutely overpowered. However, even with that being said, it was still extremely beatable in just the sense of it being an NR format deck, which means that it was either inconsistent or, more specifically, it was there were like a bunch of ways to beat it, right? Like Book of Moon was a card that just beat that deck pretty much, right? And there was a bunch of stuff like that. There's always a way to like continually play, and a bunch of this stuff was just very, very fun to play and very, very simple. And yeah, overall, very, very solid. I can't speak ill about NR. It's such a good event. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Why is it that I only have one card or one event in B tier? Because genuinely speaking, all 4 of these events I think are just so far and away above every other event. They kind of put everything else to shame. In fact, I really, really went into this thinking like, yeah, if I were to rank things, nothing would be in B tier. However, I did really enjoy the monster type events. It was just like this one was bogged down by Maxi and a few other things. But yeah, this one was also not like exceptional, but it was very much more interesting. But for the most part, like nothing really stands up to these, right? Dice Rally was very fun, but not exceptional. Duel Trials are very hit or miss. They're either home runs or they are absolute garbage, and there's very little in between. Theme Chronicle is genuinely just one of the best like alternate ban list style formats of anything, and there's a real incentive to play it over something like Ranked, and NR is the GOAT of all events. Whereas you have things like Duelist Cup or Link Regulation down here at the bottom, and the rest of these are just like fine, they're in C tier, they're average events, right? That's the thing, is like they're not bad, they're just average. I don't like them. I think that they're significantly worse than what we could get. But none of them are like, I don't know, they're just boring. None of them are that interesting. At least Legend Anthology, like, tries. I think it fails horribly. But at the very least, it tries. So, there you go. That's my thoughts on the events. And, yeah, that's going to be it. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope that you guys did indeed enjoy. If you did, a like is very much appreciated. And remember to always stay frosty. Bye-bye.